He inherited a crumbling fortress everyone laughed at. But what he discovered in the basement turned mockery into disbelief when experts valued it at $100 million. Before we explore this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning at 7:43 while Marcus Beaumont counted wrinkled dollar bills and quarters on his kitchen counter. $23.17. That's what stood between him and an empty gas tank. His refrigerator hummed with that dying sound old appliances make. The kind that promises an expensive repair bill he couldn't afford. The eviction notice, the third one, lay crumpled near the coffee maker, its red lettering screaming final notice like a threat he'd grown numb to. At 32, Marcus had become an expert at survival mathematics. 3 jobs meant 18-hour days. Waitressing at Rose's Diner from 5 o'clock in the morning until 2 o'clock in the afternoon paid $8.50 an hour, plus tips that never quite reached what the travel websites claimed. Cleaning office buildings from 6 o'clock in the evening until midnight brought in $12 an hour, but only if he finished all 4 floors. Weekend shifts at the Quick Mart grocery store added another $160, assuming he could work both days and nobody called in sick. Still, it was never enough. His phone buzzed. Unknown international number. He almost didn't answer. Couldn't afford whatever they were selling anyway. But something, maybe desperation, or maybe just the need to hear a voice that wasn't demanding money, made him pick up. Mr. Marcus Tell Beaumont. The voice was British, precise, the kind that belonged in museums or libraries. Whatever you're selling, I can't afford it. His standard response delivered while still counting change. My name is William Ashford from Ashford Payton and Associates in London. I'm calling regarding your great-uncle Theodore Blackwell's estate. Marcus stopped counting. A quarter rolled off the counter, spinning before settling near the baseboards. He hadn't had time to clean in months. I think you have the wrong person. You are the son of Cameron Beaumont, née Blackwell, are you not? Nobody had used his father's maiden name in 20 years. Not since the cancer took him when Marcus was 12. My father's been dead a long time. I'm terribly sorry for your loss. However, you are indeed the person I'm seeking. Lord Theodore Blackwell passed away 6 weeks ago, and you are named in his will. Lord? Marcus almost laughed. The only thing he remembered about his great-uncle Theodore was a single visit when Marcus was 7. The man had arrived in a black car that looked too expensive for their neighborhood, spent an hour examining their cramped apartment with his lips pursed like he'd swallowed something sour, and declared that Marcus's father had married beneath his station before leaving. That was the last time anyone from the Blackwell side acknowledged they existed. He left me something. Marcus couldn't hide the disbelief or the hope. Even a few $100s would change everything right now. Indeed. Ironhold Fortress in Northumberland, along with its contents. The quarter he dropped might as well have been his jaw. A fortress? Like an actual fortress? Quite actual, though I must warn you, it's in considerable disrepair. The estate comes with no monetary inheritance for upkeep, just the property itself and whatever contents remain inside. There are, however, conditions. Of course there were. There were always conditions when desperate people thought they'd caught a break. You must take possession within 30 days of notification, which means 28 days from today, or the property defaults to the National Trust for Development into Luxury Flats. Additionally, you must spend at least 1 night in the fortress to complete the inheritance terms. Marcus sank into his kitchen chair, the one with the wobbly leg he kept meaning to fix. This is real. You're not, this isn't some scam? I assure you, Mr. Beaumont, this is quite legitimate. I'm emailing documentation to the address we have on file. His laptop was ancient, held together with duct tape and prayer, but it worked. He opened his email while still on the phone, watching PDFs load with painful slowness. Official letterhead, legal seals, photos that made his breath catch. Ironhold Fortress looked like something from every fairy tale nightmare he'd never been read as a child. Towers stretched into grey skies, their tops crumbling like broken teeth. Ivy strangled the walls so thickly you could barely see the stone beneath. Windows were either boarded over or gaping black holes. The photograph showed room after room of decay. Ceilings collapsed, floors rotted through, furniture covered in sheets so old they'd become part of the dust itself. "Why me?" Marcus asked. He had other family, richer family. Lord Blackwell was quite specific. The fortress was to go to his brother Elijah's line, your grandfather. You are the last of that line. Last of the line. The word should have felt grand, important. Instead, they felt like another weight on shoulders already bending. I should mention, William Ashford continued, several developers have already expressed interest should you wish to sell immediately. The land alone is quite valuable, and the structure, while deteriorated, has historical significance. I could arrange, no. The word came out fiercer than Marcus intended. I mean, not yet. I need to see it first. Of course, though I must stress the time constraint. 28 days, Mr. Beaumont. After hanging up, Marcus sat in his kitchen as morning light struggled through windows he couldn't afford to wash. $23.17. Rent due in 3 days. Electric bill past due. Dante needed new shoes for school, and the soles were already separating from the ones he had. Dante, his son, 6 years old and already too good at pretending not to be hungry, at making games out of candlelight when the power got cut. Marcus looked at the photos again. A fortress, even ruined, even worthless. It was something. Maybe he could sell it. Maybe it was worth enough to finally, get ahead. But he had to get there first. Marcus called his mother, explaining through tears and disbelief. Patricia Beaumont, practical as always, immediately offered to watch Dante. "How long will you be gone?" "I don't know. A few days, maybe." "Mom, I can't afford." Marcus, tell Beaumont, you listen to me. You've been drowning long enough. If there's even a chance this helps you and Dante, you take it. We'll manage here. Your jobs will either understand or they won't. But poverty's a job too, baby. And you've been working it too long. Marcus used his last functioning credit card, the one he'd been saving for absolute emergencies, to book a flight. The cheapest option meant 3 connections and 22 hours of travel. He packed everything into a backpack held together with safety pins, kissed Dante goodbye so many times the little boy finally pushed him toward the door, laughing, and left for an airport he'd only ever cleaned and never flown from. The journey blurred together. Atlanta to New York to London, London to Newcastle by train because it was cheaper than flying. By the time he reached Thornmere Village, he'd been awake for 36 hours and felt every minute of it. The village existed in a pocket of England that time had overlooked, stone cottages huddled together along a single main street. Smoke rose from chimneys despite it being August. The few people visible stopped their conversations to watch him drag his backpack from the train platform. He'd booked the cheapest room at the only inn, the Griffin's Head, using what little remained on his credit card. The proprietor, a woman named Beatrice with silver hair and sharp eyes, took one look at Marcus and said, "You're here about the fortress then? How did you know? Nobody comes to Thornmere for any other reason these days. Plus, you have the look." "What look?" "Like someone who's bitten off more than they can chew, but is too stubborn to spit it out." Marcus managed a tired laugh. "That obvious?" "Tea?" Beatrice asked, already pouring. "You'll be wanting to know about your uncle then." "You knew him?" "Knew of him?" Nobody really knew Lord Blackwell. Kept to himself up in that fortress for the last 40 years. Had groceries delivered to the gate, never came down to the village. Strange man by all accounts. No offense. None taken. I met him once when I was 7. He didn't approve of my father's choices. Ah, Beatrice nodded, like that. Explained everything. The Blackwells were old money, old blood, old everything. Your uncle was the last of them up here. When he stopped paying the groundskeepers about 15 years ago, the place really went to seed. Been falling apart ever since. But he lived there in that condition? Far as anyone knows, he was up there until the end. Postman found him in the garden 6 weeks back. Peaceful, they said. Sitting on a bench looking at dead roses like they were still blooming. Marcus sipped the tea, proper English tea that tasted nothing like the bags he bought from the dollar store. Why would he leave it to me? We were nothing to each other. Beatrice studied him with those sharp eyes. Maybe that's exactly why. Sometimes nothing is better than something, if the something is poisoned. Your uncle had his reasons, I'd wager. The Blackwells always did love their secrets. Marcus climbed the narrow stairs to his room, feet heavy with exhaustion. The space was clean but tiny, a single bed, a radiator that clanked, wallpaper featuring roses that might have been cheerful in another decade. He set his backpack down and finally allowed himself to feel the weight of what was happening. He owned a fortress. He, Marcus Beaumont, who'd been homeless twice, who'd lost count of the times he'd chosen between food and electricity, who measured success by surviving another month, he owned a fortress. His phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from his manager at the diner, 2 from the cleaning company, 1 from the grocery store. He'd deal with the consequences later. Right now, he had 27 days to claim an inheritance that might change everything or might be the final disaster that broke him completely. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of towers falling and roses blooming in reverse. Morning arrived grey and damp, the kind of weather that seemed to seep through walls. Marcus dressed in his least worn jeans and the sweater he'd been saving for job interviews, then ventured downstairs where Beatrice was already manning the breakfast room. Devon will take you up to the fortress, Beatrice said, sliding a plate of eggs and beans in front of Marcus. He's our taxi driver, handyman, and general keeper of secrets. Already called him. I can walk. It's 4 miles uphill through woods that haven't seen maintenance since the Queen was young. You'll take the taxi. Marcus wanted to protest. Every dollar spent was a dollar he didn't have, but the look on Beatrice's face suggested argument was pointless. Devon arrived in a car that might have been new when Marcus's mother was born. He was somewhere between 50 and 70, with the kind of weathered face that suggested a life lived outdoors. He loaded Marcus's backpack without comment and started up the narrow road leading out of the village. First time seeing the old pile then? He asked after a few minutes of silence. First time in England, actually. Ah, well, prepare yourself. Ironhold Fortress isn't what it was, though I suppose nothing is. The road wound through increasingly dense forest. Ancient oaks formed a canopy overhead, their branches so thick they blocked most of the morning light. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to barely more than 2 ruts in the earth. Marcus gripped the door handle as the car bounced over roots and stones. How did my uncle get groceries up here? Delivery van once a week. Driver would leave the boxes at the gate and he'd collect them sometime after. Never saw him do it myself. Like a ghost, he was. The trees began to thin, and Marcus got his first real look at his inheritance. The photos hadn't done justice to the reality. Ironhold Fortress rose from the landscape like something organic, as if it had grown from the earth rather than been built upon it. The central keep stretched for stories high, its stone walls the color of old bones. 2 towers flanked it, one intact but leaning slightly, the other missing its top entirely. What might once have been gardens sprawled in wild abandon. Rose bushes had grown into trees, their thorns creating impenetrable walls. Topiary animals had lost their shapes, becoming green monsters. A fountain sat cracked and dry, its statue, maybe a mermaid, maybe an angel, now just an armless torso. The iron gates hung open, one side completely off its hinges and lying in the tall grass. Devon stopped just inside, his car's engine idling rough. This is as far as I go, he said. The drive's not safe for vehicles past this point. You can see why. Marcus could. What had once been a grand driveway was now more pothole than pavement, with saplings growing through cracks and entire sections washed away. He'd have to walk the last quarter mile. When should I come back for you? Marcus looked at the fortress looming ahead, then at Devon's concerned face. "I'll call you then. Word of advice, don't trust the floors, especially on the upper levels. And if you hear things at night, it's just the wind. The fortress makes all sorts of noises." He helped Marcus with his backpack, then drove away, leaving him alone with his inheritance. The silence was complete. No traffic, no human voices, not even birds, just the soft whisper of wind through broken windows and abandoned rooms. The walk to the main entrance took 15 minutes of careful navigation. The driveway wasn't just damaged, entire sections had been reclaimed by nature. He stepped over roots thick as his arm and around holes that might have been decorative ponds or might have been simple erosion. The front doors, massive oak things that belonged in a museum, stood partially open. One hung at an angle that suggested its hinges were more rust than metal. Marcus pushed through, the wood groaning protest, and stepped into his fortress. The entrance hall took his breath away, and not entirely in a good way. It must have been magnificent once. The ceiling soared 30 feet overhead, painted with a mural so water-damaged he could only make out hints of angels and clouds. A chandelier that might have held 100 candles lay shattered on the floor, its crystals scattered like tears. A grand staircase curved up to a gallery level, though several steps were missing and the banister leaned at an alarming angle. But it was the smell that hit hardest, decades of damp and rot and abandonment, like opening a tomb. Marcus moved carefully, testing each step before trusting his weight to it. The marble floor, where it wasn't covered in debris, showed a pattern of black and white chess squares. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects obscured by black mold that made them look like they were weeping. To his left, a doorway led to what might have been a parlor. Furniture draped in sheets had become shapeless lumps. To his right, another door revealed a library where books had swollen with moisture until they burst their bindings. Straight ahead, past the ruined staircase, more doors led to mysteries he wasn't ready to explore. But he was looking for something specific. The lawyer had sent floor plans with the documentation, old blueprints that showed a basement level accessed from the kitchen area. According to the plans, the fortress had extensive cellars used for storage, wine, and during less civilized times, things better left unmentioned. The kitchen was at the back of the ground floor, through a servant's corridor that felt more like a tunnel. Marcus used his phone's flashlight, battery already dropping to 60%. The walls here were plain stone, practical rather than decorative. This was where the real life of the fortress had happened. Cooking, cleaning, the endless labor that kept the fantasy alive upstairs. The kitchen itself was a cavern of rust and ruin. A massive cooking range, the kind that could feed a small army, dominated one wall. Copper pots hung from hooks, green with verdigris. A table that might have been where servants took their meals stood in the center, its surface warped and split. But there, in the far corner, where the floor plans indicated was a door. Unlike everything else in the fortress, this door looked solid, looked maintained, looked locked. Marcus approached it slowly. The door was oak reinforced with iron bands, the kind of door meant to last centuries, and it had. While everything else in the fortress showed its age, this door looked like it might have been installed yesterday, no rust on the iron, no rot in the wood, and definitely no way through the massive padlock securing it shut. He tried the lock, knowing it was pointless. The mechanism was modern, not some antique he might force. A combination lock requiring 6 digits. He tried obvious combinations, his uncle's birthday, the year the fortress was built, anything he could think of. Nothing. Marcus sat on the warped kitchen table, ignoring the groan of protest from the wood, and stared at that door. Everything else in the fortress was falling apart. But someone, his uncle, presumably, had made sure this door stayed secure. Why? His phone buzzed, 5% battery. He needed to get back to the inn to figure out his next move. But something about that door pulled at him. In all this decay and abandonment, it was the only thing that looked cared for. The only thing that mattered enough to protect. He took photos with his dying phone, then made his way back through the fortress. The journey felt longer in reverse, maybe because he noticed more details, the servant bell still hanging in the corridor labeled with rooms he hadn't seen, blue chamber, rose suite, morning room, the mouse skeleton in a corner so delicate it looked like jewelry, the way certain floorboards had been recently replaced, creating a path through the safest areas. His uncle had lived here, actually lived here in this ruin for 40 years, but he'd maintained that door, replaced those floorboards, created safe passages through the decay. Outside, afternoon was already fading to evening. Time moved differently here. Or maybe it was just exhaustion catching up. Marcus walked back down the ruined driveway, each step taking him further from the mystery and closer to decisions he wasn't ready to make. At the gates, he turned back. Ironhold Fortress looked different in the dying light, less horrifying, more heartbroken, like something that had been beautiful once and remembered it. He called Devon from the road, then sat on a stone that might have been decorative once upon a time. 26 days left. 26 days to solve whatever puzzle his uncle had left, to decide whether to sell to developers who would turn this into luxury flats for people who collected homes like stamps, or what. He couldn't keep it, he could barely keep a 2-bedroom apartment. But that door, that carefully maintained, definitely protecting something, door. Devon arrived as the last light faded, his headlights cutting through the gathering dark. "How do you find it then?" "Complicated," said Marcus, which felt like the understatement of his life. "They usually are. Old places got all their history built right into the walls. The question is whether it's the kind of history worth preserving." Marcus thought about the door, about the roses his uncle had stared at while dying, about being the last of a line he'd never known existed. "I guess I have 26 days to figure that out." Back at the inn, Beatrice took one look at him and produced soup without being asked. "You've got the look now," she said. "What look?" "The one everyone gets after their first visit, like you've seen a ghost, but can't decide if it was trying to warn you or welcome you." Marcus ate mechanically, his mind still in that kitchen, still staring at that door. He'd need tools. He'd need time. He'd need battery packs for his phone, and probably a dozen other things he couldn't afford. But first, he'd need to understand why Theodore Blackwell, a man who'd let everything else fall apart, had protected one door like it contained the secrets of the universe. His phone, charging at last, showed 17 missed calls, jobs lost, bridges burned, a life back in America falling apart in real time. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Marcus didn't feel the familiar panic. Instead, he felt something else, curiosity, maybe, or the dangerous cousin of hope that shows up when you've got nothing left to lose. Tomorrow, he'd go back. Tomorrow, he'd find a way through that door. Tomorrow, he'd discover why a man he'd met once had left him a fortress everyone laughed at. Tonight, he'd sleep in a bed he couldn't afford, in a country he'd never imagined visiting, the last of a line he'd never known existed, owner of a fortress that might be worthless or might be everything. 26 days to find out. The locked door waited, patient as stone, keeping its secrets one more night. Marcus woke before dawn, his mind already racing with plans. The locked door had haunted his dreams, sometimes it opened to reveal treasures, sometimes monsters, sometimes nothing at all. But always, it called to him. He dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, not wanting to waste time or what little money remained on laundry. Beatrice was already up, moving through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd done this routine for decades. "Early start, then," she asked, setting down tea and toast without being asked. "I need to get into that basement," Marcus said, surprising himself with the directness. "The door's locked with a modern padlock. Do you know anyone who might help?" Beatrice studied him for a long moment. "Might do. But first, you should know something. Your uncle came down to the village exactly twice in all the years he lived here. Once to arrange grocery deliveries, and once about 3 years ago to visit the locksmith." Marcus's pulse quickened. He had a lock made. Had one changed. More like. Old Samuel Kingston did the work. His past now, but his son runs the shop. Might remember something. Marcus inhaled his breakfast, thanked Beatrice, and headed into the village proper. Kingston and Son locksmiths occupied a narrow building squeezed between a newsagent and a shop that seemed to sell nothing but rain boots. The younger Kingston, though he looked at least 50, was already at work, filing keys with movements so practiced they seemed meditative. "Help you?" he asked without looking up. "I'm Marcus Beaumont. I inherited Ironhold Fortress from my uncle Theodore Blackwell." That got his attention. He set down the file and really looked at Marcus for the first time. "The American relation. Heard you'd come. Your father did some lock work for my uncle a few years ago. A padlock for the basement door. I was wondering if you kept records or maybe a spare key." He was already shaking his head. Lord Blackwell was very specific. "One key only. No copies. No record of the combination. Paid extra for our discretion." Marcus's heart sank. "So there's no way to open it?" "Didn't say that. Said we don't have a key. But locks, even good ones, they're just puzzles. And puzzles can be solved." He studied Marcus with eyes that reminded him of careful work. "Question is, should they be? Your uncle went to considerable trouble to keep something secure. He also left me the fortress," Marcus pointed out. "Everything in it." "True enough." He reached under the counter and pulled out a leather case. "Tell you what, I'll come up with you. Take a look. Professional curiosity, you might say. No charge if I can't open it. £100 if I can." Marcus wanted to protest the price. £100 was groceries for a month back home, but what choice did he have? Deal. They took his van, newer and more reliable than Devon's taxi. The journey passed in comfortable silence until they reached the gates. "Haven't been up here since I was a boy," Kingston said. "Used to dare each other to touch the walls and run. Stupid kid stuff." "Was it always in such bad shape?" "No, this is recent." "Well, recent as these things go. Started going downhill about 20 years ago, but the real decay's been the last decade. Like the house gave up when your uncle did." They parked as close as the ruined driveway allowed and made their way to the fortress. In daylight, Marcus noticed things he'd missed before, places where the ivy had been recently trimmed back from windows, a rain barrel positioned to catch runoff from the one section of roof that looked maintained. His uncle hadn't given up entirely. He'd just been selective about what mattered. The kitchen looked even worse in morning light. Kingston whistled low when he saw it, then went straight to the basement door like a bloodhound on a scent. "Now that's interesting," he said, kneeling to examine the lock. "What do you mean?" "This lock's at least 10 years old, not 3. Whatever my father did for your uncle, it wasn't this." He pulled out tools Marcus couldn't name, selected one with the care of a surgeon choosing a scalpel. "But it's a standard model. Nothing fancy. The door is the real security here." He worked in silence, occasionally making small sounds of satisfaction or frustration. Marcus found himself holding his breath. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, something clicked. "There we are," Kingston said, standing with a grunt. "Though I'd be careful going down there. No telling what shape the stairs are in." Marcus paid him, trying not to wince at handing over money he couldn't spare, and waited until his van disappeared down the drive. Then, heart hammering, he opened the door that had consumed his thoughts. The first thing that hit him was the temperature. Where the rest of the fortress held damp chill, the basement breathed cool and dry. The second thing was the smell, not rot or mold, but something else, old paper, leather, the peculiar scent of time preserved rather than surrendered to. The stairs were stone, worn smooth in the center from centuries of footsteps. But unlike the grand staircase in the entrance hall, these were solid, safe. Marcus descended slowly, using his phone's flashlight until he found a switch on the wall. Impossibly, electricity flowed. Bare bulbs flickered to life, revealing a corridor that stretched further than seemed possible. The basement wasn't a basement at all. It was a network of rooms, each one opening to the next like chambers in a heart. And every single one was filled with history. The first room held furniture, not the moldering pieces upstairs, but preserved examples of craftsmanship that took Marcus's breath away, a desk that belonged in a museum, its surface inlaid with mother-of-pearl depicting sailing ships, chairs with velvet seats that still held their color, a grandfather clock that had stopped at 11:47, though whether morning or night, recent or long ago, he couldn't tell. The second room was documents. Filing cabinets lined the walls, each drawer labeled in his uncle's precise handwriting, Correspondence 1823 to 1850. Estate Management 1750 to 1800. Personal Letters, Edmund Blackwell. Marcus pulled out a page at random and found himself holding a letter written in ink so faded he could barely make out the words. Something about shipping routes and tea prices and concern for someone's cough. But it was the third room that made his knees weak. Paintings covered every wall, stacked against each other where they wouldn't fit. Not prints or reproductions, but actual paintings, oil on canvas. Some were portraits, stern men in military uniforms, women in dresses that spoke of centuries past. Others were landscapes Marcus recognized from around the fortress, showing it in various stages of its life. In one, the gardens bloomed in geometric perfection. In another, carriages lined the drive for what looked like a grand party. He moved through the rooms like a sleepwalker, each revelation building on the last. A room of silver, tarnished but intact. A room of books that made the ruined library upstairs seem like a cruel joke. A room of clothing, dresses and uniforms preserved in cedar, waiting for parties that would never come again. And then, at what should have been the back wall of the fortress's foundation, another door. This one wasn't locked, but it was hidden. What looked like a wine rack swung inward when Marcus leaned against it, searching for a light switch. He stumbled through, caught himself, and froze. The vault, for that's what it had to be, it was circular, carved from living rock. The walls curved up to meet in a peaked ceiling that belonged more in a cathedral than a basement. But it was what filled the space that stole his breath, his thoughts, his ability to do anything but stare. Gold. Not coins or bars, though there were those too, stacked in casual abundance, but artifacts, a chalice that seemed to glow with its own light, a crown, an actual crown, resting on a purple cushion like it was taking a brief break from ruling, swords with hilts wrapped in gold wire, jewelry boxes spilling over with pieces that belonged in fairy tales. Marcus's legs gave out. He sat hard on the stone floor, staring at wealth that couldn't be real, couldn't exist. Not here, not in a basement beneath a ruined fortress owned by an uncle who'd lived like a hermit and died staring at dead roses. But the evidence surrounded him, undeniable and overwhelming. He crawled forward, actually crawled, because walking seemed too ordinary for this moment, and touched the chalice. Real gold was warm, heavier than he'd expected. The base bore an inscription in Latin he couldn't read, and a date he could, 1212. 800 years. This chalice had existed for 800 years, and now he was touching it in a hidden vault beneath a fortress everyone laughed at. Hysterical laughter bubbled up, the kind that could easily turn to tears. He pressed his hands over his mouth, afraid of what sounds might escape. The laughing crying stopped, but the shaking didn't. His whole body trembled like it was trying to reconcile what his eyes saw with what his life had taught him to expect. Marcus forced himself to breathe, to think. He stood slowly, legs still unsteady, and began cataloguing what surrounded him. The crown wasn't alone, there were 3 others, each unique, each impossibly detailed. The swords numbered at least a dozen. Jewelry filled not just boxes but entire shelves carved into the walls. And the coins, God, the coins, they spilled from rotted bags like golden waterfalls frozen in time. Some bore faces he recognized from history books. Others were so old the images had worn smooth, leaving only the weight of their metal to prove their value. In the center of the vault sat a pedestal, and on it, a leather journal. Marcus approached it like it might bite, but the book just lay there, ordinary and extraordinary at once. He opened it to the first page and found his uncle's handwriting. To whomever finds this, though I suspect it will be you, Marcus, know that I have spent my life guarding secrets that were never mine to tell. The Blackwell legacy is not land or title, but the preservation of history itself. What you see here is a fraction of what was saved during the dissolution and hidden when Henry's men came to take what they claimed was theirs by divine right. Marcus had to read the passage 3 times before the meaning sank in. Henry. King Henry VIII. The dissolution of the monasteries. He was standing in a vault that had preserved treasures from one of the greatest transfers of wealth in English history. The journal continued, each piece has its story, its provenance, its own small tragedy. The chalice you likely touched first, we all do, belonged to Glastonbury Abbey. The crown with rubies was hidden by the Abbot of Fountains before his execution. These are not ours to sell or display, but ours to protect, as Blackwells have done for 20 generations. 20 generations. Marcus tried to do the math and gave up. Centuries of his family, unknown and unmet, had guarded this secret. And now it had fallen to him, the American relation who'd been counting quarters for gas money 3 days ago. He kept reading, his uncle's voice coming through the careful script, I had hoped to have children, to pass this burden properly, but life rarely follows our plans. I watched from afar as my brother's line dwindled, as you grew up knowing nothing of your heritage. Perhaps that's why I chose you. The others, the cousins who circle like vultures, they know too much. They would see only the gold, not the responsibility. Marcus thought of the conditions in the will, take possession within 30 days, spend at least one night in the fortress, tests, he realized now. His uncle had been testing whether he'd come, whether he'd stay, whether he'd search. If you're reading this, the journal continued, then you've passed the first test. You didn't sell immediately. You searched for answers instead of easy profits. That tells me I chose correctly, despite what the family will say. The family. Marcus had a sudden uncomfortable thought about why his father had been so thoroughly cut off. Had he known? Had he chosen poverty over this beautiful, terrible responsibility? The journal detailed more history, more pieces, the silver altar set from Rivos, the illuminated manuscripts from Whitby, piece after piece saved from destruction, hidden from kings and governments and time itself. But it was the final entry that made Marcus's decision for him. I leave this to you not as wealth, but as purpose. I spent my life alone in these walls because I confused guarding with hoarding. The world has changed. Perhaps it's time for these treasures to stop hiding and start teaching. I couldn't find the courage to change. But you are not me. You are your father's son, too. And he was brave enough to choose love over duty. Perhaps you can find a way to honor both. Marcus closed the journal and looked around the vault with new eyes. Not just gold, but stories. Not just wealth, but responsibility. Not just an inheritance, but a choice. He thought of Dante, his son, who deserved better than counting quarters and keeping quiet when the lights went out. He thought of the village below, dying as slowly as the fortress above. He thought of his uncle choosing solitude over sharing this burden. But mostly he thought of possibilities. The art historians who would weep to see these pieces. The museums that could properly care for them while sharing their stories. The careful legal ways treasures like these could be documented and preserved while still providing for the living. Because that's what his uncle had missed, wasn't it? So focused on preserving the past, he'd forgotten about the future. Marcus pulled out his phone, dead again despite charging all night, of course. But it didn't matter. He wasn't ready to tell anyone yet. Wasn't ready for the circus that would follow. First, he needed to understand exactly what he'd inherited, every piece, every story, every responsibility that came with wealth that shouldn't exist, but did. He made his way back through the rooms, seeing them differently now. Not just storage, but a catalogue of saved beauty. His uncle hadn't just hidden these things, he'd organized them, preserved them, created conditions that would keep them safe for another generation. The furniture room held pieces saved from destroyed manor houses. The documents told stories of families ended, faith tested, power shifted through violence and greed. Even the silver, tarnished but intact, represented communities scattered and reformed. This wasn't just his inheritance. It was England's inheritance, hidden away by a family that had decided preservation mattered more than law. By the time Marcus climbed back to the kitchen, afternoon light slanted through broken windows. He closed the basement door, though the lock hung useless now. Anyone could walk in, could descend those stairs, could find what he'd found. But they wouldn't. Because the same instinct that had made him search instead of sell was already planning. The treasures needed protection while he figured out what came next: legal counsel, proper authentication, a way to honor both the past and the future without destroying either. He walked through the fortress with new purpose, noting which rooms could be secured, which might be restored first. The tower that still stood straight could be stabilized. The great hall, underneath its decay, had good bones. This could be more than a ruin. Could be more than a museum. Could be something entirely new. A bridge between what was saved and what could still be built. At the gates, Marcus turned back to look at Ironhold Fortress one more time. It didn't look like a joke anymore. It looked like what it was: a secret wrapped in stone, a responsibility dressed as ruins, a chance to change everything. 25 days left. But he wasn't counting down anymore. He was counting up. 25 days to plan, to research, to find lawyers who specialized in the impossible and historians who understood that some treasures were worth more than money. Because Marcus Beaumont, who'd been nobody special 48 hours ago, now owned a basement full of England's hidden history. And somewhere in all that gold and silver and carefully preserved beauty, he'd found something worth more than all of it. He walked back to the village as evening painted the sky purple and gold, his mind spinning with possibilities and plans. The weight of centuries pressed on his shoulders, but for the first time in his adult life, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like wings. Tomorrow he'd start making lists, legal requirements, security needs, historians who could be trusted, the logistics of revealing treasures that had been hidden since Henry VIII decided monasteries had too much wealth. But tonight, he'd call Dante and tell him about the fortress, not the gold, not yet, but about the roses trying to bloom and the rooms waiting to be filled with laughter again. Because Theodore Blackwell had been wrong about one thing. This wasn't a burden to be carried in solitude. This was a gift meant to be shared, carefully, wisely, but shared nonetheless. The locked door was open now. What had been hidden was found. And Marcus Beaumont, last of the Blackwells, first of something new, was just getting started. Beatrice looked up when Marcus entered the inn, took one look at his face, and poured something stronger than tea. Found something, then, she asked, sliding the glass across. Marcus thought of golden chalices and saved stories, of responsibility and possibility, of a basement that held more history than most museums. Yeah, he said, the word carrying the weight of kingdoms. I found something. He sipped the whiskey, his first ever, burning and warm, and started planning how to tell the world that sometimes the biggest jokes hide the greatest treasures. 25 days to change everything. He couldn't wait to begin. The discovery in the basement changed the very air around Marcus. Where before he'd walked through the fortress seeing decay, now he saw potential. Each ruined room wasn't just damage to repair, but space to fill with purpose. The broken windows weren't just holes, but future frames for light to pour through, illuminating treasures that had lived too long in darkness. But first, he had to protect what he'd found. That evening, he cornered Devon in the village pub, buying him a pint with money he couldn't spare but considering it an investment. I need help, he said simply. Discreet help. People who can be trusted. Devon studied him over his glass. Found the family secrets then, have you? Marcus's silence was answer enough. I thought as much. Your uncle had that same look when he came down for the locksmith, like he was carrying something too heavy for one person. He took a long sip. What kind of help? Security first. Then, I'm not even sure. Legal help, historical expertise, people who understand that some things matter more than their monetary value. That's a rare breed these days, but they exist. Devon nodded slowly. My nephew's with a security firm in Newcastle. Discreet, like. Does work for museums and private collectors. Want me to call him? Please. And for the rest, there's Professor Chen at Durham University. She consulted on some National Trust properties, knows everyone worth knowing in the heritage world. Marcus pulled out his phone to make notes, then remembered it was dead again. Devon slid a napkin and pen across the table. How did you know? Marcus asked while writing. About the family secrets. Villages like this, we know things without knowing them, if you catch my meaning. 40 years of groceries delivered to one man. All those books on medieval history, the way he'd sometimes stare at the fortress like it was a living thing that might speak. We knew there was something, just not what. Marcus thought about the journal, about 20 generations of guards. The village has kept the secret too, in its way. I will. Keeping it, if that's what's needed. But secrets have a way of wanting out, especially old ones. Question is whether you let them escape wild or set them free proper. That night, Marcus made calls from the inn's ancient landline, Beatrice tactfully finding reasons to be elsewhere. Devon's nephew, James, agreed to come up the next day. Professor Chen, Dr. Lily Chen, which made Marcus smile at the coincidence of the name, listened to Marcus's carefully vague description and agreed to a meeting. I should warn you, Dr. Chen said over the phone, if this is what I think it might be, you're about to enter a very complicated world. Authentication, provenance, legal ownership, cultural heritage claims, it's a minefield. I know, Marcus said, though he was only beginning to understand. That's why I need help. Most people in your position would be calling auction houses, not academics. I'm not most people. No, Dr. Chen agreed, something like approval in her voice. I'm beginning to see that. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of golden chalices and crumbling towers, of Dante wearing a medieval crown while doing his homework, of his uncle's ghost nodding approval or shaking his head in warning. Marcus could never quite tell which. Dawn found him in the fortress's kitchen again, waiting for James and his security assessment. He arrived in an unmarked van, all professional efficiency until he saw the fortress itself. Bloody hell, he muttered. Uncle Devon said it was rough, but this. Most of the value is in the basement, Marcus explained, leading him to the now unlocked door. He watched James's expression change as they descended, from skepticism to interest to outright awe. By the time they reached the vault, he'd gone completely silent. Right, he said finally. I'm going to need a bigger team, better locks, and probably a miracle. He pulled out a tablet, began making notes. First priority is basic security, cameras, alarms, motion sensors, but subtle, like. No good announcing there's something worth protecting. How long to do it right? 2 weeks minimum to do it so no one notices. 3. Marcus's heart sank. 3 weeks was almost all the time he had left. But James continued, I can have basic measures in place by tomorrow, though. Enough to sleep easier while we do the rest. They spent the morning walking through the basement rooms, James photographing everything while muttering about insurance values and security grades. Marcus learned new vocabulary, passive infrared sensors, glass break detectors, pressure mats, a whole language of protection he'd never needed in his old life of having nothing worth stealing. Dr. Chen arrived that afternoon, a small woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Marcus, exhausted, overwhelmed, still wearing the same clothes from 3 days ago, and suggested they talk over tea first. Tell me about your uncle, she said once they were settled in the inn's dining room. Not the inheritance. Him. It seemed an odd place to start, but Marcus found himself talking about the one visit when he was 7. The smell of mothballs and disappointment. The way his father had cried after Theodore left, not from sadness, but from anger. He said his brother, my grandfather, had been the brave one, the one who chose love over duty. But that Theodore got stuck with the consequences, the burden of preservation. Duty, Dr. Chen murmured. I've seen it in other old families. Each generation thinking they're the guardian, that selling or sharing would be betrayal, until the weight of it crushes them. Is that what happened to my uncle? He was crushed, perhaps. Or perhaps he was waiting for someone who could see another way. She paused. Tell me, what do you want to do with whatever's in that fortress? Marcus had been thinking about this constantly. I want it to matter. Not just the money, though God knows I need that too. But the stories, the history. I want it to teach and inspire. He stopped, embarrassed by his own earnestness. And I want my son to be proud, to know he comes from something more than struggle. Dr. Chen smiled. Then let's go see what you've inherited, shall we? The professor's reaction to the basement was everything Marcus had hoped, not greed or calculation, but reverence. She moved through the rooms like a pilgrim, occasionally making soft sounds of recognition or surprise. "Oh, you beautiful thing," she whispered to an illuminated manuscript. "Lindisfarne, unless I miss my guess." Thought lost in 1540. In the vault, she actually sat down on the floor, overwhelmed. "Do you understand what this is?" she asked Marcus. "This isn't just wealth. This is history we thought was gone, destroyed, melted down for coin, or shipped abroad. But it's here. Saved by 20 generations of my family, apparently." "Illegally saved," Dr. Chen pointed out, but she was smiling. "Though after 500 years, certain statutes of limitations apply. Still, this will require very careful handling." "Very careful indeed." They spent hours in the vault, Dr. Chen explaining the significance of different pieces. The chalice wasn't just gold, it was evidence of medieval craftsmanship techniques historians had only guessed at. The crowns weren't just jeweled, they were documents in metal, recording ceremonies and traditions scholars had pieced together from fragments. "Your uncle was right about one thing," Dr. Chen said, closing the journal reverently. "These have been hoarded long enough. But he was wrong about another. This isn't a burden. This is a gift, to you, yes, but more importantly, through you, to everyone who hungers to understand where we came from." "So what do I do?" "First, we document everything properly, every piece photographed, catalogued, researched. Then we start the authentication process, carefully, quietly, with experts who can be trusted. Only then do we begin thinking about what goes where. Museums, yes, but the right museums. Some pieces might stay here if the fortress can be properly restored as a heritage site. Others might tour, teaching as they go." "And the value?" Dr. Chen laughed, but not unkindly. "My dear, you're sitting in a room with enough medieval gold to fund a small country. But the real value, the historical value, priceless, isn't a big enough word. This will change textbooks, rewrite understanding, make careers, and destroy assumptions." She stood, dusting off her skirt. "The question is whether you're ready for what comes next. Which is, everything changes. The moment this becomes public, everything in your life changes. Media, lawyers, distant relatives appearing like mushrooms after rain, scholars and treasure hunters and government officials all wanting their piece. Are you ready for that?" Marcus thought of Dante, of counting quarters, of choosing between food and electricity. Then he thought of his uncle, alone for 40 years with his secret, letting roses die rather than share the burden. "I'm ready," he said, and for the first time since finding the vault, he meant it. The next week blurred together in a haze of activity. James's team arrived in unmarked vans, installing security so subtle Marcus had to ask where they'd put things. Dr. Chen brought trusted colleagues, an art historian who actually cried when he saw the paintings, a metallurgist who spent 3 hours examining a single crown, a manuscript expert who declared the library the find of the century before fainting. Marcus divided his time between the fortress and the inn, learning more about his heritage with each passing day. The Blackwells hadn't just been nobility, they'd been scholars. The family tree Dr. Chen uncovered showed generations of historians, antiquarians, collectors, all apparently guarding the secret of the basement. They were clever about it, Dr. Chen explained over dinner one night. Never too wealthy, never too prominent. Just prosperous enough to maintain the fortress, just scholarly enough to explain their interest in history. Hidden in plain sight. Until my uncle, yes. Something changed with him. The money ran out, perhaps. Or the will. He let the fortress decay rather than risk exposure by selling even a single piece. Marcus thought he understood. Each item in the vault came with the weight of centuries, the trust of generations. How did you choose which promise to break first? But he had something his uncle hadn't, a reason bigger than tradition. Dante deserved more than a legacy of beautiful secrets. He deserved a future built on them. 10 days into the cataloguing, Marcus got the call he'd been dreading. Dante was sick, nothing serious, just a cold, but he wanted his father. The sound of his son's stuffed-up voice saying Daddy nearly broke Marcus's resolve. "I'll be home soon, baby," he promised. "Just a little longer." "Did you find treasure in the fortress?" Dante asked, still young enough to believe in fairy tales. Marcus looked at the notebook filled with documentation, chalices and crowns, manuscripts and masterpieces. "Yeah, baby. I found treasure." "Good treasure or scary treasure?" "Out of the mouths of babes." "Both, I think. But mostly good." "Are we going to be princes now?" "No, sweetheart. But we might be something better." "What's better than princes?" Marcus smiled, thinking of museums filled with children learning, of stories finally told, of history preserved and shared instead of hoarded. "Teachers, maybe. The kind who get to share amazing secrets." "That sounds boring," Dante declared with 6-year-old honesty. "Maybe a little," Marcus agreed. "But boring in the best way." After hanging up, Marcus sat in the kitchen of the fortress, his fortress, though he was still getting used to that, and made a decision. The catalogue was far from complete. The authentication would take months. The legal complexities could take years. But he wasn't waiting anymore. He called Dr. Chen. "I want to go public. Not everything, not yet. But something. One piece. Something that shows what we're dealing with without revealing the full scope. That's risky. Once one piece is known, people will come looking for more. They're going to anyway. Jane's security is good, but we can't hide this forever. Better to control the narrative than let it control us." Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. "You're thinking like your ancestors now. Strategic. All right. Which piece?" Marcus knew exactly which one. "The chalice. The one from Glastonbury. It was the first thing I touched. And according to the journal, it meant something special to my uncle, too. The Holy Grail connection will certainly get attention." "Is it the Holy Grail?" "Of course not. But it's a magnificent example of ecclesiastical metalwork, and the Glastonbury connection gives it wonderful provenance." "Yes, I think that would work. One piece, carefully revealed. A taste of what's to come." They planned the announcement like a military campaign. Press release drafted by the university's media team. Exclusive access offered to a respected journalist who specialized in cultural heritage. Security increased around the fortress without being obvious about it. The night before the story was set to break, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked through the fortress by moonlight, no longer needing a flashlight to navigate the safe paths. In the great hall, he paused, imagining it restored, not to its original grandeur, that belonged to a different world, but to something new. A place where people could come to learn, to see, to understand. The basement called to him, as it always did now. He descended to the vault and sat with the treasures that had changed his life. The chalice caught the light from the single bulb, seeming to glow within a fire. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," he said to the empty room, to his uncle's ghost, to 20 generations of guardians. The silence that answered felt like approval. Or maybe that was just hope, the dangerous cousin of desperation that had brought him here in the first place. Tomorrow the world would learn that Ironhold Fortress, that joke of a ruin everyone had laughed at, held treasures beyond imagining. The mockery would turn to amazement, then to envy, then to all the complicated emotions that came with discovering that sometimes the least likely places held the greatest wonders. But tonight, it was still just Marcus and his impossible inheritance, sitting in a vault that shouldn't exist, planning a future he couldn't quite believe. 20 days left on his deadline. But he no longer needed them. He wasn't going anywhere. This was home now, not just the fortress, but the responsibility, the purpose, the chance to turn hoarded beauty into shared wonder. He picked up the chalice one more time, feeling its weight, its history, its potential. Tomorrow it would belong to the world. But tonight, for one last night, it was still a secret between him and the darkness, golden and glowing and full of promise. The locked door was open. The treasure was found. And Marcus Beaumont, who'd started this journey counting quarters for gas, was about to discover that sometimes the biggest jokes held the most profound truths. Sometimes mockery was just wonder that hadn't recognized itself yet. Sometimes the least likely inheritors made the best guardians. And sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales came true in the most unexpected ways. The story broke at 6:23 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Marcus knew the exact time because he was watching his phone, waiting for the inevitable explosion. The Guardian's website updated first: lost medieval treasures discovered in Northumberland Fortress, Glastonbury chalice found after 500 years. By 6:30, his phone was unusable. Calls, texts, emails, a digital avalanche that forced him to turn it off entirely. But he could see the village from his window at the inn, and already cars were arriving, vans with satellite dishes, reporters with determined expressions. The secret was out, and there was no putting it back. What happens next will turn this discovery upside down, reveal truths nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the biggest revelations come with the highest price. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Beatrice knocked on his door at 7, carrying tea and wearing an expression of grim satisfaction. Well, you've done it now. There's already a queue of journalists downstairs wanting to know if you're staying here. What did you tell them? That my guests' privacy is worth more than their bribes, though the one from the BBC offered £300 just for your room number. Marcus laughed despite his nerves. Should have taken it. Could use the money. You won't be saying that much longer, I expect. Beatrice set the tea down and studied Marcus with those sharp eyes. Ready for this? No. But my uncle spent 40 years hiding. I won't make the same mistake. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Durham University, neutral ground where Dr. Chen could provide academic credibility. But first, Marcus had to get through the morning, which meant running the gauntlet of reporters already gathered outside the inn. He chose to walk straight through them, head high, saying nothing but please come to the press conference to every question. They followed him like hungry seagulls, shouting questions that ranged from respectful to ridiculous. Is it true there's more than just the chalice? How does it feel to go from poverty to priceless? Are you related to the royal family? Will you sell to the highest bidder? That last one made him stop and turn. A young reporter, aggressive and smirking, clearly thought he'd found his angle. Everything has a price, he continued. What's yours? Some things, Marcus said quietly, are worth more than money. You'll learn that when you're older. The dismissal in his tone did what his silence hadn't, made them step back, reassess. This wasn't the desperate American they'd expected. At the fortress, James's security team had established a perimeter. The relief of passing through, of having barriers between him and the chaos, nearly made him cry. But there was no time for breakdown. The experts were arriving. Dr. Patricia Helmsworth from the British Museum came first, followed by a team that made Marcus think of forensic investigators at a crime scene. They wore gloves, carried cases of equipment, spoke in hushed voices like they were in church, which Marcus supposed they were, a church of history. Mr. Beaumont, Dr. Helmsworth said, extending a hand. She was older than Dr. Chen, with white hair pulled back severely, and eyes that had seen every forgery, every false claim, every disappointing revelation. Shall we see what you found? The descent into the basement had become routine for Marcus, but watching the experts' faces made it new again. The furniture room earned appreciative murmurs. The document room caused actual gasps. The paintings room produced a silence so complete Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. But it was the vault that broke their professional composure entirely. Dear God, someone whispered. Dr. Helmsworth sat down right there on the stone floor, pulling off her glasses to clean them with shaking hands. I've been in this field for 40 years, she said finally. I've seen treasures you wouldn't believe. But this is impossible. Yet here it is, Dr. Chen said quietly. The authentication process was meticulous. Each piece examined, photographed, tested with instruments Marcus couldn't name. The chalice alone took 3 hours, with experts debating makers' marks and metal composition and artistic style. But when they were done, the verdict was unanimous: authentic, priceless, revolutionary. The chalice is definitely from Glastonbury, Dr. Helmsworth announced to the assembled team. Early 13th century, matching descriptions from Abbey records we thought were exaggerated. But it's this, she gestured to a crown set with sapphires, that's going to rewrite history. This is the crown of Adelaide, second wife of Henry I. Historians have been arguing about whether it even existed for centuries. Value, someone asked. Dr. Helmsworth's laugh was sharp. You can't put a price on proving historians wrong. But if you insist on numbers, the chalice alone would break auction records. The crown museums would bankrupt themselves bidding. And this is just what I can see from here. The full collection, she trailed off, but Marcus could fill in the silence. The full collection was worth more than numbers could capture. The press conference came too soon. Marcus found himself on a small stage, lights glaring, cameras rolling, facing a room packed with journalists from around the world. Dr. Chen sat on one side, Dr. Helmsworth on the other, but Marcus was the one they wanted to hear from. He'd prepared remarks, but looking at the hungry faces, he set them aside. 3 weeks ago, he began, his voice steadier than he felt, I was counting quarters for gas money. Today, I stand here as the guardian of treasures that belong not to me, but to history itself. The chalice we're revealing today is just the beginning. Ironhold Fortress holds artifacts we thought were lost forever, preserved by 20 generations of my family who believed some things matter more than law, more than wealth, more than anything except preservation itself. Questions erupted, but Marcus held up his hand. Let me be clear about my intentions. These artifacts will not be sold to private collectors. They will not disappear into vaults. They will be properly preserved, studied, and shared with the world, because that's what my uncle wanted. That's what my family died believing. And that's what I'm going to make happen. The questions came in waves after that. How many pieces? Marcus remained vague. Total value? Priceless, he insisted. Would he keep any for himself? Only the responsibility, he said, earning a laugh. But it was a question near the end that silenced the room. Mr. Beaumont, are you aware that Theodore Blackwell had a son? Marcus's composure cracked. What? The journalist, older and clearly enjoying the shock value, continued. Oliver Blackwell, born 1962, given up for adoption. He's been trying to claim the inheritance for years. Says he's the rightful heir. The room erupted. Dr. Chen grabbed Marcus's arm, whispering urgently about not responding, but Marcus couldn't hear over the roar of blood in his ears. A son? His uncle had a son. They escaped through a side door, security forming a human wall against the pursuing journalists. In the car back to Thornmere, Marcus's mind raced. A son changed everything, legal heir, prior claim. The careful plans he'd been making, suddenly built on sand. Did you know? He asked Dr. Chen. No, though it explained some things. Your uncle's isolation, the specific terms of the will. Back at the inn, Beatrice was waiting with whiskey and warnings. He's here. Oliver Blackwell. Checked in an hour ago. Room 12. Marcus wanted to hide, to process, to figure out what this meant. But that wasn't who he was becoming. What room? Marcus, no, Dr. Chen protested. I need to meet him. Need to understand. Room 12 was on the second floor. Marcus knocked before he could lose his nerve. The man who answered looked nothing like the uncle Marcus remembered. He was tall where Theodore had been small, harsh where he'd been refined. But something in the eyes, grey like winter mornings, marked him as family. So, he said, not inviting Marcus in. You're the American who stole my inheritance. I didn't steal anything. He left it to me. He gave me up when I was 3 days old. Didn't want the scandal, unmarried father, you see. Couldn't have that in the Blackwell line. His smile was bitter as old coffee. But I've known who I was since I turned 18. Been writing to him for 20 years. Never got a single reply. Then he dies and leaves everything to some American cousin who met him once. Tell me how that's fair. Marcus couldn't. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair, not him being given up, not Marcus's father being cut off, not 40 years of silence and secrets. What do you want? He asked. What's mine? The fortress, the contents, all of it. And the treasures. What would you do with them? His shrug told Marcus everything. Sell them, obviously. What else would you do with a bunch of old metal? Preserve them. Share them. Honor them. Pretty words. But you can't eat honor, can you? Can't pay rent with preservation. He studied Marcus, seeing something that made him sneer. Oh, you're one of those, think you're better because you want to give it all away. Let me guess, museums and universities and the public good. Yes. Then you're a fool. But it doesn't matter. I've got lawyers, documentation, birth certificate proving I'm his son. Your little claim won't stand against blood. Marcus left without another word, but Oliver's certainty followed him. In his room, he found 17 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. The 18th came while he was staring at the phone. Mr. Beaumont, this is Penelope Ashford from Ashford Payton and Associates. A different Ashford, apparently this one sounded like she ate lawsuits for breakfast. We need to discuss the challenge to your inheritance. Can you come to London tomorrow? Is it serious? His claim. Serious enough. But your uncle was very specific in his will. Very thorough. I think you should see what else he left. Marcus made the journey in a haze. The story had exploded overnight, every major news outlet running variations of secret treasure hoard found in English fortress. His picture was everywhere, usually the one from the press conference where he looked overwhelmed but determined. Dante had called, excited because his father was on TV. Marcus's mother had called, worried because reporters were camped outside her house. The law offices occupied a building that whispered old money from every marble surface. Penelope Ashford looked exactly like she sounded, sharp suit, sharper expression, sharpest legal mind in the room. Tea, she offered, already pouring. You're going to need it. She produced a box Marcus recognized, the same type that had held the original will, but this one was labeled differently, to be opened only in case of contestation. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Oliver Blackwell. All returned unopened. Your uncle wrote to his son, too, Penelope explained. Every year on his birthday. But he never sent them. I was instructed to keep them. She handed Marcus a document that made everything else fade away. A second will, properly witnessed, dated just 6 months ago, much more detailed than the first, and absolutely devastating to Oliver's claim. To my son, Oliver James Blackwell, Marcus read aloud, I leave the sum of £1 million to be paid from the sale of specific items detailed in Appendix A. These items, Victorian furniture and 19th-century paintings, are explicitly not part of the historical collection and may be sold without violating the family trust. This bequest is made with love and regret for the life I could not give you. To Marcus tell Beaumont, I leave Ironhold Fortress and all remaining contents, with the specific understanding that he will serve as guardian of the Blackwell collection, preserving and sharing these historical artifacts as detailed in my journal. This guardianship is not merely ownership but a sacred trust, given to one who has shown through his struggles and his strength that he understands the difference between price and value. Marcus had to stop reading, his vision blurred by tears he hadn't expected. There's more, Penelope said gently. A letter to you. Marcus opened it with shaking hands. My dear Marcus, if you are reading this, then Oliver has appeared as I always knew he would. I do not blame him for his anger, I earned it through decades of cowardice. But I could not leave him the collection. He would see only money where you see meaning. I watched you from afar. Yes, I kept track of my brother's line. I know about your struggles, your strength, the way you've raised your son with grace despite hardship. You understand what it means to guard something precious. Oliver is my blood, but you are my heir in all the ways that matter. Stand firm. The collection needs a guardian, not a merchant. And perhaps, in your kindness, you might find a way to help my son understand what I never could teach him, that some inheritances are worth more than gold. Marcus folded the letter carefully, mind racing. £1 million was more money than Oliver had probably dreamed of. But would it be enough? Will this hold up in court? He asked Penelope. Your uncle was very careful. The first will was simple to avoid immediate challenges. This one is ironclad. Oliver will get his million, a generous inheritance by any measure, but the fortress and the historical collection are yours. She paused. Though I should warn you, he's not the only one circling. What do you mean? Penelope pulled out another file. 3 other distant relatives have emerged since the news broke. 2 American cousins from a branch that immigrated in the 1800s, 1 elderly gentleman claiming to be your uncle's half-brother from an affair. None have particularly strong claims, but they'll try. Of course they will. Marcus laughed, but it came out cracked. Anything else? Long-lost wives, secret children, ancient curses. Just the media attention, which might be worse than a curse. You can't go home, you know. Not to America, not yet. Too many cameras, too many questions. Your son is better off without reporters shoving cameras in his face. Marcus finished, I know. My mother's keeping him home from school until it dies down. It won't die down. Not with what you found. This is the kind of discovery that rewrites textbooks. Every historian, every museum, every collector in the world is going to want access. You need to be prepared for that. Marcus thought of the vault, of the rooms full of treasures he'd barely begun to catalogue. How do I do this? How do I protect it all while still sharing it? Carefully, systematically, and with very good lawyers. Penelope smiled for the first time. Lucky for you, we're very good lawyers. The journey back to Thornmere took longer than usual. Reporters had figured out his travel patterns, waiting at train stations and service stops. Marcus kept his head down and moved fast, grateful for the boring clothes that helped him blend in. But he could hear the whispers, see the recognition dawning on faces. That's him. The fortress man. Must be worth millions. At the fortress, the security presence had tripled. James met him at the gate, expression grim. We've had attempted break-ins. Nothing serious yet, kids, mostly, treasure hunters. But it's going to get worse. I know. Marcus looked up at the fortress. His fortress. This impossible inheritance that kept revealing new complications. We need to move faster. Get the most valuable pieces somewhere secure while we figure out long-term plans. The British Museums offered vault space, Dr. Chen said, appearing from the command post they'd set up in the old stable block. Temporary, while you sort legal matters. Dr. Helmsworth has been calling hourly. Not yet. Marcus paused, trying to articulate the feeling. I need to understand it all first. Every piece, every story. I can't protect what I don't understand. That night, while security patrolled the grounds and reporters camped outside the gates, Marcus descended once more to the vault. He brought a camping lantern this time, better light to really see what surrounded him. Each piece had its own presence. The chalice they'd announced gleamed innocently, unaware it had started a media frenzy. The crown of Adelaide sat on its purple cushion like it was waiting for something, coronation or revelation. Manuscripts that might rewrite history lay stacked casually as newspapers. Marcus picked up his uncle's journal again, reading entries he'd skipped before in his haste. The weight of secrets is not their gold, but their silence. Each piece here has been voiceless for centuries, waiting for someone brave enough to let them speak. I was not brave. I confused preservation with imprisonment. Do not make my mistake. I won't, Marcus whispered to the empty vault. I promise. His phone buzzed. He'd finally gotten a new one with a number only 5 people knew. Dr. Chen, urgent. Check the news. Marcus pulled up the BBC website and felt his stomach drop. Photos of the vault, not perfect ones, taken quickly at angles, but clear enough. Someone had been inside. Someone had documented what he'd tried to keep private. The headline screamed, Ironhold secret vault, treasures worth £100 million hidden in fortress basement. £100 million. They'd even put a number on it. A ridiculous, probably conservative number that would bring every treasure hunter, every thief, every desperate dreamer running. Marcus ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time despite the ancient stone's protest. In the courtyard, chaos. Security teams sweeping the grounds, police cars arriving with lights blazing, and Dr. Chen, white-faced, holding a tablet showing image after image of the treasures he'd tried to protect. How? Marcus demanded. We're checking everyone. Every expert, every security member, everyone who's had access. James looked sick. I'm so sorry. This is my failure. No. Marcus surprised himself with the firmness. No, this was always going to happen. We need to adapt. Move everything tonight. Move it where? Marcus looked around at the fortress walls, at the reporters visible beyond the gates, at the helicopter now circling overhead. He thought of Dante, of safety, of promises made to the dead and responsibilities to the living. London. The British Museum. Dr. Helmsworth's offer. It hurt to say it, like admitting defeat. But only temporarily. Only until we can make this place what it should be. The evacuation happened in darkness. Unmarked vans, armed escorts, each piece wrapped and crated with care that bordered on reverence. Marcus insisted on riding with the chalice, the first thing he'd touched, the key that had unlocked everything. As they drove through the night, England sleeping unaware of the history passing by, Marcus's phone rang. Oliver. Saw the news, he said without preamble. £100 million and you want to give it away. I want to preserve it, share it. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, you're just another Blackwell man choosing duty over family. Your father left you £1 million. That's not nothing. It's not £100 million either. No, Marcus agreed. It's not. But it's what he wanted, what he thought was right. Silence stretched between them, filled with decades of hurt. Neither of them had caused, but both had inherited. I'm going to fight, he said finally. I know. I'll probably lose. Probably. But I have to try. You understand that, right? I have to try to claim something from the father who gave me away. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the chalice's case against his knee. I understand. And Oliver, when this is over, when the lawyers are done and the dust settles, the offer stands. To see it all, to understand what he protected and why. To be part of the family that shares this instead of hoards it. He hung up without answering, but Marcus thought he heard something in his breathing before the line cut. Not acceptance. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of understanding. The convoy rolled on through darkness, carrying treasures that had hidden for 500 years toward a new chapter. Behind them, Ironhold Fortress stood empty for the first time in centuries, waiting to be reborn as something more than a vault, more than a secret, more than the mockery it had endured. Marcus Beaumont, who 3 weeks ago had been nobody special, closed his eyes and tried to reconcile who he'd been with who he was becoming. Guardian of treasures, keeper of stories, bridge between what was hidden and what would be revealed. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete, but it was begun. And sometimes beginning was everything. The chalice in its case seemed to pulse with warmth, though that was probably just his imagination. Probably. But in a world where forgotten treasures waited in basement vaults and family secrets spanned centuries, Marcus was learning not to dismiss anything as mere imagination. The revelation was still unfolding, would unfold for years, probably. But tonight, racing through darkness with history in the hold and destiny unclear, Marcus Beaumont was exactly where he needed to be. Guardian of the impossible, heir to the unlikely, ready for whatever revelation came next. 6 months. That's how long it took for the lawyers to finish their battles, the experts to complete their cataloguing, and Marcus to transform from a man who counted quarters into someone who could stand before Parliament and argue for the preservation of cultural heritage. 6 months of Oliver's legal challenges failing one by one, of distant relatives appearing and disappearing like morning mist, of learning that guardian meant more than just owner. But on this December morning, standing in the restored Great Hall of Ironhold Fortress, Marcus finally understood what his uncle had meant about the weight of legacy. "Daddy, is that our chandelier?" Dante's voice echoed in the vast space, 6-year-old wonder making everything new. He'd arrived the night before, finally able to join Marcus after the media circus had calmed to a manageable roar. "It is, baby. Do you like it?" The chandelier, not the original shattered one, but a faithful reproduction, cast rainbow light across walls that had been carefully restored. Where water damage had destroyed the ancient murals, contemporary artists had created new ones, telling the story of preservation and revelation alongside the older tales of nobility and tradition. "It looks like fairy lights. Are we really going to live here part of the time? This is going to be a special place where people come to learn, but we'll have our own space too, just for us." The East Tower had been converted into private apartments, modern comfort hidden within medieval walls. Marcus had insisted on it. He wouldn't be an absentee guardian like his uncle. This place needed life, laughter, the sound of children asking impossible questions. Devon appeared in the doorway, no longer just the village taxi driver, but head of local operations for the Ironhold Heritage Trust. "The journalists are here for the walkthrough. Ready?" Marcus smoothed his shirt, not designer, he wasn't that transformed, but nice enough for cameras. "Dante, want to help me show people our fortress? Can I tell them about the secret passages?" "Maybe not all the secrets. We need to keep some mystery." The press tour was carefully orchestrated. Marcus had learned to manage media like he once managed 3 jobs, strategically, efficiently, never giving more than necessary. They started in the Great Hall, moved through the restored galleries where selected pieces from the collection were displayed behind museum-quality glass. "The full collection remains protected," Marcus explained to the cluster of reporters, their recording devices catching every word. "We're working with the British Museum, the V&A, and institutions worldwide to ensure each piece is properly preserved and shared. Some will remain here permanently. Others will travel, teaching as they go." "What about the Crown of Adelaide?" someone called out. "Currently on display at the Tower of London, where it's broken attendance records. It will return here for our official opening in the spring." "And the chalice?" Marcus smiled. "The Glastonbury chalice has found a permanent home in the Abbey ruins where pilgrims can see it in context, though it spends winters here for preservation." He led them through rooms that told stories within stories. The family gallery, where portraits of 20 generations of Blackwells now included a photo of Marcus and Dante, linking past to future. The scholars' room, where researchers could apply to study the documents that were rewriting medieval history. The Children's Discovery Center, where replicas let young hands touch what would otherwise remain behind glass. "This isn't just a museum," Marcus explained as they paused in what had been the ruined library, now rebuilt as a research center. "It's a living institution. We host students, researchers, artists. The village school comes weekly. We're not hoarding beauty anymore. We're multiplying it." After the journalists left, Marcus walked the grounds with Dr. Chen, who'd become not just an advisor, but a friend. The gardens were still a work in progress, but already the bones of something beautiful were showing through the chaos. "You know, Theodore would be proud," Dr. Chen said. "Would he?" "I've turned his secret into a circus." "No, you've turned his burden into a gift. There's a difference." They paused at the bench where Theodore had died, now restored and surrounded by rose bushes that would bloom come spring. A plaque read simply, "For TJB, who kept the faith." Oliver came by yesterday, Marcus said quietly. Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow. How did that go? Better. He's trying. Took the job managing the commercial side, the gift shop, the tea room, the events. Turns out he's good at it. Who knew a Blackwell could actually make money instead of just hiding it? And you're okay with him being here? Marcus thought about it. The legal battles had been brutal, but somewhere in the fighting, they'd found something like understanding. Oliver would never love the artifacts the way Marcus did, but he was learning to respect them. And Dante adored his new uncle, which complicated Marcus's ability to stay angry. Families are complicated, he said finally. But yeah, I'm okay with it. They were interrupted by James, still head of security, but now managing a professional team rather than a crisis response unit. The minister's here for the signing ceremony. The ceremony took place in the vault itself, transformed from hidden secret to secured sanctuary. The Minister for Digital, Culture, Media, and Sport had come to sign the papers that would officially designate Ironhold as a protected heritage site, ensuring its preservation for generations. This partnership between private ownership and public good, the minister said, cameras capturing the moment, represents a new model for heritage preservation. Mr. Beaumont's commitment to sharing these treasures while maintaining their security should be commended and replicated. Marcus signed where indicated, his signature looking strange on documents that would go into national archives. 6 months ago, he'd been signing eviction notices. Now he was signing history. After the officials left, Marcus found himself alone in the vault where it all began. The most precious pieces were gone, the Crown of Adelaide, the Glastonbury chalice, manuscripts worth kingdoms distributed to institutions that could properly care for them. But the vault wasn't empty. New treasures had taken their place, letters from school children who'd visited, their drawings of knights and princesses and Mr. Marcus, the treasure man, covering one wall. Photos from the village festival that had celebrated the fortress's reopening, showing faces that had gone from suspicious to proud. A guest book already filled with names from 50 countries, people who'd come to see what had been hidden, and stayed to understand why it mattered. Daddy! Marcus turned to find Dante in the doorway, holding the hand of a woman Marcus recognized with a start, his mother. Patricia Beaumont looked older, grayed by worry and worn by years of struggle, but her eyes were bright with tears. Mom, I thought you weren't coming until next week. Couldn't wait. Had to see my boy in his fortress. She pulled Marcus into a hug that smelled of home and hard times survived. Look at you, Lord of the Manor. I'm not a lord, just a guardian. Same difference from where I'm standing. Patricia looked around the vault, taking in centuries of preserved beauty. Your uncle would be spitting mad, you know. All his secrets out in the open. No, Marcus said, thinking of the journal, the letters, the weight of solitary duty. I think he'd be relieved. He was just too scared to do it himself. They climbed back to the main floor, 3 generations of Beaumont men and women walking through halls that had sheltered 20 generations of Blackwells. In the Great Hall, the evening reception was beginning. Villagers and dignitaries mixing with the easy democracy of shared pride. Beatrice was there, no longer running the inn, but managing the fortress's hospitality operations. Told you that first day you had the look, she said, pressing a glass of champagne into Marcus's hand. What look? Like someone who'd bitten off more than they could chew, but was too stubborn to spit it out. She clinked her glass against Marcus's. Turns out that's exactly what this place needed. The evening blurred into a kaleidoscope of conversations. The Archbishop discussing plans to create a pilgrimage route connecting Ironhold to other sites where rescued artifacts had been returned. The head of the local school excitedly describing the curriculum they were building around the fortress's history. Artists who wanted to create new works inspired by the old. But it was a quiet conversation near the end of the night that would stay with Marcus longest. Oliver found him on the ramparts where he'd escaped for air and perspective. The village spread below, lights twinkling in houses that had found new life as the fortress brought visitors, jobs, hope. I've been thinking, he said without preamble. Dangerous habit. He almost smiled. About my father, our uncle, what he gave up and what he kept, and I hated him for so long. For giving me away, for keeping all this while I had nothing. But watching you these past months, he paused, searching for words. He didn't keep it, did he? He was kept by it. Prisoner and guard both. Yes. And you broke that cycle. Opened the doors. Let it all breathe. He looked at Marcus directly for the first time in months. I'm glad he chose you. I wouldn't have understood. Would have sold it all and counted myself clever. You might have. Or you might have surprised yourself. People do when they're trusted with something that matters. Is that why you gave me the commercial operations? Trust, partly. And partly because you're a Blackwell. This place is in your blood as much as mine. Different branch, same roots. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the last guests leave, the fortress settling into quiet around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more artifacts to place, more stories to tell, more bridges to build between past and future. But tonight, Marcus could rest in what had been accomplished. Dante asked if he could have his birthday party here. Oliver said suddenly. In the spring, when the roses bloom. I told him he'd have to ask you. But you've already started planning it, haven't you? Maybe. The Great Hall would be perfect. We could do a medieval theme. Knights and princesses, the whole thing. I know a caterer who does historical feasts. Marcus laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like months. Oliver Blackwell, party planner. Theodore would definitely be spitting mad now. Good. Someone should have made him mad years ago. Might have saved us all some trouble. The next morning, Marcus woke early in his tower apartment. Dante starfished across the bed between him and Patricia. 3 generations of Beaumonts under a roof that had sheltered 20 generations of Blackwells. The poetry of it wasn't lost on him. He slipped out quietly, padding through halls that still surprised him with their beauty. The morning light threw restored stained glass painted rainbows on stone floors. In the breakfast room, once a lesser dining hall, now a sunny space for family and staff, he found Dr. Chen already at work. The Kyoto Museum wants to borrow the illuminated manuscript collection for their medieval exhibition, she said without looking up. And the Met is asking about the tapestries again. Tell them yes to Kyoto. Maybe to the Met. We need to keep some mysteries here. Speaking of mysteries, Dr. Chen slid a letter across the table. This came by special courier this morning. The letterhead was royal. Marcus's heart skipped as he read the formal language that boiled down to something unprecedented, a royal warrant recognizing Ironhold as a site of special cultural significance, with Marcus named as hereditary guardian. This makes it official, Dr. Chen explained. Not just legally, but culturally. You're not just holding these treasures, you're recognized as their protector by the highest authority in the land. Marcus set the letter down with shaking hands. Hereditary guardian. Dante will have the choice when he's old enough to accept the responsibility or pass it on. But yes, the legacy continues. No pressure for a 7-year-old. He's 6. And from what I've seen, he's already practicing. Did you know he's been giving unauthorized tours to his classmates? Marcus groaned. What has he been telling them? That his father is a treasure knight who rescued gold from a dragon. Not entirely inaccurate, metaphorically speaking. The day unfolded with the rhythm Marcus had learned to love. Morning meetings with staff, 32 people now employed directly, more in the village benefiting indirectly. Tours at 10 and 2, Marcus himself leading special groups through rooms that still whispered their secrets. Lunch with researchers poring over documents that rewrote assumptions. Afternoon tea with visitors who'd traveled from around the world to see what had been hidden. But it was the evening that brought the full circle moment. Dante's school class had prepared a play about the fortress's history. In the great hall, under the chandelier that caught light like trapped stars, 6-year-olds in cardboard crowns acted out centuries of hiding and finding. Once upon a time, Dante narrated, his voice clear and confident, there was a fortress full of treasures, but they were sad treasures because nobody could see them. Marcus watched from the side, Oliver next to him running the lights, Patricia taking pictures, Dr. Chen smiling at the simplified but essentially true history. Then a brave man came from far away, Dante continued, and Marcus realized with a start that the boy in the too big costume was meant to be him. He was very poor but very kind, and the fortress knew he would share the treasures instead of hiding them. Historically inaccurate, Oliver whispered. Emotionally perfect, Marcus whispered back. The play continued through battles with dragons, lawyers, Marcus assumed, and meetings with kings, government officials, until finally the fortress was open and the treasures were happy because everyone could see them and learn their stories. And they all lived happily ever after, Dante concluded, then added in his own voice, except it's not after yet because the story is still going. The audience, parents, villagers, staff who'd become family, erupted in applause. Marcus felt tears he didn't try to hide because Dante was right. The story was still going, would keep going long after Marcus was gone. That was the real treasure, the real legacy, not gold or crowns or manuscripts, but the continuous story of preservation and sharing, of beauty saved and multiplied. Later, after the children had been collected and the hall cleaned, Marcus made one last circuit of the fortress. In each room, he saw not just what was, but what would be, more stories to tell, more beauty to share, more connections between past and future to forge. In the vault, he paused at his uncle's portrait, newly hung among the family gallery. Theodore Blackwell looked stern and sad, but Marcus thought he caught something else in the painted eyes. Relief, perhaps, or recognition that the burden had finally become a gift. I did it, Marcus said quietly. Not the way you might have, but the way I could. The way Dante's generation needs. I hope you understand. The portrait, of course, said nothing, but the fortress around them seemed to breathe agreement. Stones that had held secrets now holding celebrations. Rooms that had hidden treasures now teaching them. Marcus climbed to his tower apartment where Dante was already asleep, worn out from his starring role. Patricia sat by the window, looking out at the village lights. Proud of you, his mother said simply. For what? Getting lucky. For being brave enough to accept the luck. For turning it into something more. For showing Dante that Beaumont men don't just survive, we transform. Marcus sat beside his mother, two people who'd known hunger, watching a son who'd no purpose. The weight of legacy sat differently now. Not a burden to bear alone, but a gift to share widely. The family financial advisor says we're secure for 3 generations, Marcus said. The trust, the tourism, the careful sales of duplicate pieces. Dante will never count quarters for gas. That's not the inheritance that matters, Patricia said. You've given him something worth more than money. You've given him meaning. Through the window, Marcus could see the vault entrance, now properly lit and secured, but accessible to those who sought to understand. In 6 months, he'd transformed from someone who hid from bill collectors to someone who revealed hidden history. From someone who had nothing to someone who guarded everything. From the American nobody to the hereditary guardian of treasures beyond price. But the real transformation was simpler and more profound. He'd learned the difference between having and holding, between owning and stewarding, between keeping secrets and keeping faith. The fortress bells, restored and programmed to ring the hours, chimed midnight. A new day beginning. Another page in the story Dante rightly said was still going. Marcus Beaumont closed his eyes and felt the weight of 20 generations of guardians who'd come before and the lightness of all those who'd come after. The mockery had turned to wonder. The burden had become purpose. The inheritance had transformed into legacy. And in a tower room of a fortress everyone had laughed at, 3 generations of Beaumont slept peacefully, guarded by stones that had learned to share their secrets and treasures that had finally found their voice. The story was still going. And for the first time in his life, Marcus couldn't wait to see what happened next. Because he'd learned the most important lesson his uncle's journal had tried to teach, legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about what you set free. The Ironhold Heritage Trust would grow. The collection would travel and teach. Children would learn that history lived not in dusty books, but in golden chalices and jeweled crowns and the choices of people brave enough to preserve beauty in the face of power. And somewhere, Marcus believed, Theodore Blackwell's spirit finally rested easy, his burden lifted, his secrets transformed into stories worth sharing. The end? No. Dante was right. The story was still going. And in the morning, when sunlight streamed through stained glass to wake a little boy who'd grown up in a fortress, when tourists arrived to see treasures that had waited centuries for their moment, when Oliver opened the gift shop and Dr. Chen catalogued another manuscript and the roses in the garden pushed out their first tentative blooms, the story would continue. Because that's what legacies do. They don't end. They transform, inspire, and invite others to add their chapters to the tale. Marcus Beaumont had started as someone counting quarters and searching for gas money. He'd become the guardian of treasures worth £100 million. But his true achievement wasn't in the finding or the keeping. It was in the sharing. And that, more than gold or fortresses or crowns that had graced royal heads, was a legacy worth leaving.